Hello everyone, this is Javiera for 1133podcast.com, and today I am with Pai Villaraza, the founder of the Inner Dance Process from the Philippines. Pai has a fascinating life journey. He was born in Manila, and having finished his marketing degree at the age of 25, he became a peregrine. He walked away from all known comforts with no money, family or friends connections, in a state of absolute trust. For 2 years, he was on a mono diet based on coconuts, where he explores the awakening of consciousness and uncovered how to access internal source of energy. After he returned to a social life, he wrote a book titled Conscious Trance, The Journey to the Dancer Within, and has traveled to more than 60 countries, supporting thousands of people on a powerful awakening process called Inner Dance. So I want to say that myself, I have experienced these workshops and they are always transformational and deeply powerful. It is for me, I'm really excited to bring Pai into 1133 podcast and to share a little bit of his immense knowledge on the awakening process and consciousness and human beings. So, Pai, it is so good to reconnect with you today. And I guess how I would like to start is to know where you're at.
That's a great question, Javi. Well, I'm doing a lot of assimilation work. Like, you're gonna love it, more or less. Like, I feel like I'm eating the world, and the world is all information, and it seems to just come together into me. Like a lot of things that I took up in college, because I used to be in marketing, right? So I'm looking at a lot of communications models, which is really what inner dance and spirituality is about. So it's helping me to understand even the non-spiritual parts as all part of the same spiritual mind. Like I feel like everything's just talking to me right now, and it's coming together. So just one big aha moment.
And is there anything that is coming to your awareness that is grabbing your attention the most?
Sure. Well, I think part of that might be for you, like, because you're talking to so many amazing people, right? And you're with them every day. Like, what is going to be unique coursing through the inner dance experience? So for me, that's really what it's about, because I feel like every single person has their own vision statement. You know, like when an artist has an exhibit, like in a museum or an art show, they need to have this thing that binds all the work together, and it's called the artist statement. So I think the work that we do, even what you do with these podcasts and what I do with Inner Dance, is we're bringing out the vision statement, whether it be the teacher statement or the healer statement in people. So I feel like I'm more in an impersonal way around this work, where I'm sensing not so much my statement, but like the inner dance within everything statement. And I'd like to forward, let's say, a very clear proposal to the world on what does it exactly do, what is it for, and then how does it come into application in the real world.
I love what you do, Pai, and I just want to share with the listeners that I had the honor to live with you for a while in the Philippines, to share space, and I'm impressed always of the amount of service that you put out there, energy, insights. You are supporting workshops after workshops, dozens, hundreds, thousands of people, and traveling the world. So I'm super thrilled to be talking to you right now.
I think even more than that, I think what we're interested in is, everyone talks about societal transformation and what is it and how does it work? I think what makes the inner dance interesting is, me, I don't actually teach that much, right? I'm always like at home taking care of the kids.
It's more about the energy that you bring.
I think what's more interesting is it's spread across the world like a virus. Like it seems to have something about it that instantly spreads, that is a little bit different from all of the other modalities, because I don't really take care of people as much. I don't keep up with them. But you look at almost all major countries in the world, there's at least one inner dance community sprouting up that I don't even know about, So there's something about it that mirrors the spreading of activation happening inside that's also built into the framework that, so I think beyond me, it's like the energy itself has a mirroring effect, like something happening within states of consciousness that has a certain email to us that we're receiving. So I think that's really what I want to tap into. Like, what has changed, and how is it that it has this organic growth where we don't really need to put that much work into it? It just happens in its own.
I love that. Could you explain a little bit what inner dance is about for the people that have never heard about that before?
So just a little bit of context around me. I basically underwent a spiritual awakening around the years 2002 all the way to maybe till today. But the most intense parts of it took place around 2007 to 2012, where my body was experiencing so much energy coursing through it. And I think this is what the Indians call the Kundalini rising, or what they call the energies of transformation. So I really see myself not so much of a healer or a teacher who is spreading this work. I see myself more almost as a researcher who's interested in the human process. Like I'm interested in the mind. So it took me around 10 years of spreading this work around the world. And I feel like it's only in the last 3 years where I actually start to understand what this is, not just as an experience, because that was there in the beginning, right? I was just experiencing wholeness. But seeing what the wholeness means through human cognition, I think is part of my work now. Not so much like facilitating these workshops, but really coming into an understanding through dialogue, like who are we and what exactly is happening here.
I'm loving it deeply. This is such an intense, deep work.
Right. It's I mean, you've lived with me for some time, and you've seen me at work in different places, and some of my organizers in the past would tell me that this is maybe the most catharsis I've seen in my whole life, hanging out with you in the space of a month or 2 months. So there's something very deep about this that seems to have an intelligence on its own.
And you also talk about stages of awakening.
Sure. That and the states of consciousness. Stages of awakening might look like the different steps that leads to what we call oneness, or the space where everything is intersubjective or interconnected. But states of consciousness would look more at the shifts in the global mind. Sometimes we think that there's 7 billion people in the world, right? But I really feel that as we travel into this space of becoming one, we really are just one person living separate lives, now coming into awareness that there's a shared space. So I think on the way to that, we're going to recognize very subtle shifts in human consciousness, and it's something we can speak to, something that is giving us feedback all the time. And as soon as we're able to get away from the distractions, I feel that we can start really mapping certain things out that are not really old, not really new too, but coming together of that which we already know, but within this aha, eureka moment.
And tell me, Pai, within your journey, what are the differences that you can notice in the collective or in the workshops that you're giving right now?
Okay.
Is there anything that is happening to all of us in an easier way, or without any effort, as you were saying before?
Yeah. I think it's amazing that depending on where you're at, you're going to see a different aspect of the world's mind. So let's say you live in Palawan, or you live in New York City, or you live in Bali. We start to experience the unity through the subjective experience and the object of the world. And it comes in different ways. So there seems to be like a symmetry happening. So let's say you live in Ubud, I think it's amazing that everywhere you go in Ubud, it seems like everyone starts to look the same and it's speaking the same languaging. That seems to be the ideal in some ways, like we're all becoming one global village. We're becoming one people, but it's important that we also travel to the places in the world where we're not exactly the same, that there's diversity. And it gives more lessons, in fact, on understanding some of the polarities that are coming into the bridging. So to answer your question on what exactly is happening to the state of consciousness, okay, I might have to go into the trance state that we see happen during the inner dance, where people go into expanded or altered states of consciousness. And for some people, this looks like a hypnosis or a trance where it seems like you're losing control or you're becoming another person. But another way of looking at it is it's actually quite the opposite, that this is the break from the trance, or this is the break from the hypnosis that the Indians or the Buddhists, the Hindus might call Maya or the world of illusion. That this is not us becoming another personality. This is actually us becoming who we are. So a lot of people are working on that through all of this expansive, ecstatic work. And we're finding out that there are different elements that help us to do it, either through spontaneous movement or conscious dialogue or just the lowering of inhibition. So what I'm interested in is, through mapping out these experiences, I'm noticing subtle but tremendous shifts in the way the central nervous system and the brain is functioning. And through the inner dance, to give people just a little bit of a backdrop, I use a lot of sound to bring about this heightened state. Now, this wasn't intentional. I see sound more as a way of activating oscillations or frequency in people, like the 4 brain states that are intermixing together depending on what you're eating and who you're talking to, right? So basically, what I've been looking at lately is what's called the dream state, or the circadian rhythms that we go through every night. That when we go into this thing called the REM, or paradoxical sleep, we have to journey through 4 or 5 brain states in order to reach this heightened state of awareness called the dream. Now, according to basic psychology, there's only 3 basic states of consciousness, which is wakeful state, non-REM, and REM sleep, right? So it's interesting when you look at the lucid dream, what you're talking about is something previously uncharted in the normal sense, because it's not mentioned. This is called wakeful REM. So I think neurologists and psychologists have been tracking what exactly makes it different. So they're finding out that there are certain centers in the brain called the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex. This is like the executive governor, the planner, the thinker. It shuts down during dream state through muscular paralysis, so that we don't really have any inhibitions and we become free. It's also what allows us to access the expanded states of being and seeing and non-doing. Well, what's interesting with the inner dance is it seems to work on lucid dreaming, but it seems to have broken a certain part in the brain's normal way of functioning through this mysterious spontaneous movement, that if you look at the historical awakening experience, people actually start experiencing energy coursing through their body through what you call kriyas, or spontaneous release, or spontaneous crying, or suddenly speaking in tongues or seeing visions. I think what's amazing, Javi, is we're seeing shifts in human consciousness, especially through the doorway of the brain, the spiritual doorways of the brain. So I've been tracking this for quite some time. I have been observing people go into heightened states. And in the beginning, this is something that came automatically because my body was experiencing a lot of energy through this Kundalini rising experience that I had when I was living in coconuts, or when I was living on an island alone as a hermit. So basically, I was very interested in the questions, why is this happening, really? It took me around 10 years to really understand what it is. So here's the gist of it. I think that basically human beings are on the brink of experiencing another level of human consciousness. So when you look at basic psychology, it basically tracks that there are 3 states of consciousness, those being wakeful state, non-REM, and REM sleep. So a lot of these have to do with brainwaves. So I've been tracking this because the inner dance is basically a journey into 4 or 5 brain states, the delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma states. And using sound as a way to oscillate those frequencies, we basically take people into what's called the paradoxical sleep or the dream state, where the body needs to be in a state of muscular paralysis or non-inhibition. A lot of this falls around neurological networks or semantic networks, where we need to shut down a certain part of your body, which is controlled by the boss. It's called the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex. That's what you need to do to go to the dream state. So it's paradoxical sleep, and it's very interesting, the state of flow. It's quite polar, where the mind needs to work on a beta or gamma state, where the oscillations are happening in a very, very fast way, like very vibratory. But the body needs to be non-inhibited. So the body needs to be oscillating around delta or theta waves, meaning it can't really be in a defensive mode. So when you look at the 3 states of consciousness that psychologists are looking at, you have to wonder, okay, what about lucid dreaming? Lucid dreaming is basically when the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is turned on, which is the thinker or the planner, but at the same time, we're experiencing REM awake. So it's like a combination of the wakeful state and REM. So what I see happening around places like Bali and anywhere in the world where a lot of spiritual work is happening, I feel that we're starting to tap into the lucid dreaming one step up, where when you look at especially ways in which people are accessing body wisdom, especially through things like inner dance and so on and so forth, like, the breath work, this holotropic breathing, we seem to be breaking something very specific that is related to the pain avoidance cycle. Mostly the cycle of fear avoidance. This is a medical model that is, I think, maybe around 10 years old, coined by Robert Letham, that says that the more you're afraid, the more you experience pain, the more you actually avoid pain, and the more you avoid that part of your body that's feeling pain, and then the more it becomes painful until it becomes something like cancer or old age or depression. And then the only way you can heal that cycle is to go into what's called confrontation or the observation, the witnessing. So when you look at the work of inner dance, there's a schizophrenic quality in which both ego and consciousness begins to separate, and they both wake up. So this is basically delta and gamma talking to each other. Do you understand? Like, we're using music and we're using ways of holding people so that they can both have a conversation together. Mm. And the way we observe it, the body starts to stimulate itself in a very, very intense way that has certain outcomes. Number one is they start to experience time in a different way, very similar to how some people might experience a psychedelic journey or the near-death experience. In fact, when you study the neurology of it, it's exactly the same states, whether it be an ayahuasca experience or a life review, when the people experience after they die, and some people come back and they share that. The spiritual awakening is in fact the same. So I feel that if we're able to track this, Javi, I feel like all the more we can speak to doctors and teachers, which is what we've been doing here in Asia. We've been working with educators, and we've been working with medical practitioners on the question, like, how does this apply? So if I was to give advice on this to healers and energy workers out there, I would suggest that we work a lot more on what's called the autonomic nervous system. Mm. Basically, we have 2 buttons inside of us. It's basically called the panic button, which is called the sympathetic nervous system, or the calming button. which is the calming. The parasympathetic is the calming button. So we understand the sympathetic system through the fight or flight, where the amygdala gets triggered and then we contract in fear. And the opposite is called the rest and digest, where our body relaxes and all of our systems just expands, you know? And so what's interesting about this is we like to think in polarities. Either sometimes, you know, we want to do really deep meditation. We want to have a really deep, relaxing sleep. But at other times, we want to just go to a party. We want to have a sexual experience with the entire universe, and we want to interact with it through total engagement. So it's the union of the masculine and the feminine. And this is what the dream state is for me. When we know how to marry the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine, when we look at the autonomic nervous system, it's not actually to become one or the other, because neurologists have been tracking it. They were asking the question, what exactly is it in the human system that allows people to experience that life review, that awakening of seeing the vastness of the universe after they die? In 1 second, they see their whole life flash before their very eyes. They tracked it. It's actually when you're about to die, your body goes into panic. So your heart starts to pump really, really fast. Then your brain, your neurotransmitters, your adrenaline goes off and pumps up. What's interesting is it's when people start to relax, when they start to expand into, it's okay, I'm going to die anyway. It's when you intermix both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, that's when the spiritual awakening happens. It's like your body needs to be in delta or theta in order to hold so much gamma, the kundalini energy coursing through us. It's when you know how to mix those up, that's when you go into this expanded flow state.
Wow. The way you are combining spirituality and science, it's admirable. Like I have almost nothing to say by it. It's like I just keep bringing all this knowledge forward. Happy to be here for you.
Yeah, this is just 1% of it. I could just go on and on for months and not stop talking. But maybe this is how the world might understand it so well. Seeing that yoga, for example, is one of the most explosive openings into spirituality in the world, right?
Yes.
All these yoga studios around the world. So one way to look at the sympathetic nervous system is when you do yoga, that's basically the sympathetic. You're pumping up your body, your neurotransmitters, dopamine, cortisol, noradrenaline. It's just spreading across your body. And what you're doing is you're engaging not just your life force or your prana, you're actually engaging your fear. You're going into confrontation of the trapped negative, nothing is negative, but all this trapped energy that you think is pain in your body. What I'm interested in is the last position of the yoga practice, right? What's it called?
Shavasana, if I'm not wrong?
Yes. It's called the Shavasana. That's called the parasympathetic, where you go into the rest and digest. So I think that, and I'm observing this, when yoga teachers start to spend more time in Shavasana with their class, that's when these heightened states actually come about. Because when you compare it to the inner dance class, how does it start?
We start lying down.
Yeah, it starts with the Shavasana. So the Kundalini is the parasympathetic in many ways. It's just that our mind kind of gets in the way. So when I start to experience these yoga teachers who use music to awaken the parasympathetic, it's the insight there is it's basically saying, of your fear, there was nothing wrong with your pain. It's just that when you expand, you don't experience it as pain anymore. It's now called power or wisdom. It spreads across the body. And then because we're not fighting it anymore, we're not in defensive mode, what happens is we assimilate wisdom and we have this one big aha moment. Like it comes as a vision, or it comes as this subconscious way of understanding, not subconscious, but super conscious way of seeing everything, So that could be very simple. And it's amazing how we're in the Philippines, who've been talking to doctors and we've been dialoguing with teachers on what does the new curriculum in the school look like, or what does the new medical protocol look like when we treat cancer or depression or cardiovascular problems or algebra, subject verb conjugations or quadratic equations. What does it look like when we're able to access the brain in a much more expanded way through this knowledge? And it's really working. It's just amazing.
And this is something that I've been hearing over and over again, which is the word embracing. And it's the same thing that you're saying now, is allowing. It's confronting that we have been avoiding for so long. And I'm impressed that this works at an emotional level, at a spiritual level, and at a physical level as well.
Yeah, it's all over, isn't it? Because we're hiding it. It's a tricky thing, because even as we go for our awakening experience, we can't help but realize that as we're motivated to do what seems to be expandedly good for us, we're also doing quite the opposite. We're hiding a part of us that doesn't really want to come into vulnerability or honesty. So the mind doesn't see it all the time. There was a man in the 1970s who won a Pulitzer Prize for writing this book called Denial of Death. His name is Ernest Becker, and he talks about this thing called terror management. It's this phenomena of knowing that you're going to die, like it doesn't matter if the human beings are able to ride and create airplanes that were flying around in these big machines and we are walking in the moon. It's a lot of our spiritual awakenings or our transcendent experiences, our successes are actually coming about because of our fear of death, our fear of dying. So yes, emotionally, psychically, mentally, and physically, a lot of it is it's actually our fear that's driving it all. And it's this energy of honesty, especially through these podcasts and these dialogues and these quiet conversations in these cafes, that we start to sense what you call the context, the bigger, what is the bigger picture? So I feel like the brain is only getting wired recently, like in the last 30 years, through this secondary orality that this new worldwide unitive languaging through the internet is bringing about. Yeah.
The quiet discussions. I love that. Pai, tell me, once you experience a big expansion, or you're aware of the universe, or you have split of a second of awakening, what's your opinion or your experience with integration?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Today I was reading the work of a famous philosopher named Martin Hildegard, and his term for the state of being is called Dasein, or it's basically the unity that marries it creates the union between the subjective experience and the object of the world, meaning you and the world become one. And because I've been watching this through tens of thousands of people who come to my space, or come to me through whatever motivation, like I'm sick, I don't want to die, could you help me? Or I am awakening, can you give me some kind of input that guides me? It's just quite vast, isn't it? For me, the integration is tricky because we're going to lose ourselves no matter what we do. At the same time, we're going to gain ourselves, and there's so much terror. That's where the terror is. Where a part of us wakes up, a part of us is going to have to die, and we hold on to the last vestiges of what we know to be real as we become the reality of all that is. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and we were talking about intentional community, all these eco-villages around the world that are sprouting up. I told her, I think the only eco-village that I might want to belong in the world today would be the only one that has 7 billion people in it. Because that's the truth, and those 7 billion people are merely stewards for a gazillion number of micro and macro organisms that are the whole universe. And so I think everyone's terrified of the fact that we're really just one. Everything is just one family and one tribe. And there's such a resistance to becoming that. So the integration for me is this infinite, forever way of becoming this awakening of consciousness. And in the past, we were more comfortable with calling consciousness God or the universe. I feel that when anyone says, I am awakening, I don't really understand that, because that's really your name or your ego talking. Mm-hmm. For me, the true awakening is God is awakening in you. And our version of God and universe within is called consciousness, which is what this new cosmology and this new quantum physics is telling us, that everything is omnipresent everywhere. So integration then very often doesn't look like integration when it's happening, because on the journey to becoming fearless, this journey of becoming without ego, without separation, we're going to be tested. And I think the best healers out there are the ones who are able to hold our hands and say, don't go into problem solving too fast, understand that this is maybe happening because this problem or this crisis is actually that which is purging you to become without ego, become consciousness.
That's a beautiful way to see it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's scary.
Actually, I was going to ask you, how do you, what's a way to face that terror or to manage that terror?
I would need to have two answers to that, because I am a global citizen. At any point, I live with people from the West. At the same time, I'm Asian. So I have Eastern and Western parts about me. So I love it that it's you and me talking to each other, because we belong to very similar cultures. Like you talk about South and Central America, it's very similar to the Philippines, where we're Spanish oriented. Yes. So I think in terms of communication and the type of people that we are, it's what you call monochronic or high context cultures, where we're very cultural and we're very subjective. And when you look at the communication models related to that, high context cultures are the cultures where we see the power in the individual words. Like, we're very careful about what we say, because a lot of people get hurt in our cultures when people don't understand what you're saying. It's so very community based, right? But at the same time, we don't really explain ourselves that much. We feel like our cultures kind of explain it. So we're very non-confrontational. So when you look at something like Switzerland or Germany, that's what you call low context, where people talk a lot. People use a lot of words in order to explain themselves, and the individual words don't matter as much. It's what you call polychronic. So I think that the awakening experience for either side, either cultural context, is different. And so my advice is for people to understand, what is the culture that you're coming from? And so for Asians and for maybe South Americans or even certain European countries that are very high context cultures, because they're so community based, the arising is very much the awakening of the individual as opposed to the awakening of the collective, because we were born into the world with a huge notion that we are already one as a community. These are basically shame-based cultures like Japan or the Philippines, where we worry so much about what other people think. Now, when you look at low context cultures like America or like some of the more progressive nations, people are now wanting to go into spiritual work because they're too individualized and they long for a sense of tribe or a sense of universality. So the inroads are quite different, but what holds them together is basically context. It's still that word. For me, any kind of problem or crisis, depression or ignorance that arises is because we lost the context. We lost the point. Why are you here? Why are you in your body? Why did you choose your parents? Why are you experiencing exactly what you're experiencing? They lost it. They're doing exactly what they're doing because everyone else is doing it, or it makes more money, and it's causing a lot of energy maintenance that's leading to suffering. So healing and the spiritual awakening is really talking about the larger context, not just this context of subjectivity or ego or culture, but what is the context, which is also the word for meaning. I think that's what people are looking for. What does it mean, Not just as a cognitive thing, but to really experience it and feel it and really embody it. Like, I understand, the ecstasy of really understanding. Because a lot of people are going into spiritual work, in fact, to avoid understanding. It's to go out of the mind. It's to experience the unitive state as an experience, but to meet experience with total cognition, I know now. That's the life review. That for me is the best. So yeah, if we could box context, bring it about, understand the framework upon which it comes about. And for me, there's really just one universal tool that I've seen work more than any other tool there is, which is called trust. I think that a lot of suffering in the world is happening because we live in a doubt-based society, and people are just so disconnected, and they don't know the science and art and spirit that allows trust to bring context about. And when we are able to sit down with a person that we trust or who trusts us, it's almost like the wisdom just unravels itself. And whatever it be, the knowledge that you picked up in school or the next thing that you read in Wikipedia or TED Talk or YouTube or the next movie that you see, it's like this universal languaging where every bit of information that comes to us, we receive it. It's like, oh, wow, I'm experiencing this. God is speaking to me and I understand. I understand what it means. For me, that is the goal, like the rediscovery of meaning. And to kind of put a circle around that, it's because we're so subjective that we lose the capacity to come into the larger picture. We really need to get the subjectivity out of the way as soon as we can, because we're so tired of being alone and not having the intimacy with the Big Bang, like the black hole. What would that be like, to be intimate with everything, the good and the bad, the light and the dark, the left and the right, being all parts of the same thing?
Sounds like something really, really big. And natural as well.
Well, it's already happening. I mean, I envy you because you live right now in a place in the universe where there's so much of this happening. Like any given day, you see explosions of light happening in basic conversations. Like everywhere you look, people meet each other in the eye, and there's this recognition, I know you. There's not that many places in the world where this is happening. And every time I go to Ubud, every time I meet people there, it gives me hope because, wow, we're quite close. We're modeling the highly evolved society that is a dream called the Garden of Eden or the Elysian Fields or Shambhala that was written about. It's actually happening. Like, this is not somewhere out there. It's happening right now. This is heaven. Heaven is always here, and we can activate it through choice, through illumination.
I want to ask you something really simple. And it seems like obvious, but how do we cultivate trust? How do we trust?
Okay, yeah, that's a chicken and egg. Trust's partner is intuition. Because trust is weird. Trust is like, I understand, but I don't understand, right? That's what trust is. Like, I'm going to trust this because I don't understand it, but there's a part of me that understands it. And when I do energy work with people, a lot of people share the trust is felt more on the lower chakras, like in the lower body. So it seems to be trapped. I'm tracking it somewhere in the sympathetic system. It seems to be contracting the body in a certain way. And when trust normally when the opposite of trust is doubt or attachment. You know, when you do this energy process and the Kundalini rises, there's this thing about the back, you know, where it begins to break. You know, people start to do that bridge, or they experience this cathartic waves, and they're either crying or not, but there's these cathartic waves. I mean, you know what we're talking about.
Yes.
It's a universal phenomenon happening in energy work. For me, that is the energy of doubt or attachment coming into trust. Because the parasympathetic, which is the calming button, works more on the base of the spine and the back of the head, where the brain stem meets the brain. So when that opens, the body expands, and then the mind opens. When the mind opens, then the understanding comes. So for me, trust is more like an attitude that you need to imbibe first. It's like, I kind of understand, but I don't get it, but I'm going to trust it. Well, when you stick to that, because you're vibrating it, eventually you will trust. Eventually you will understand, because you had the attitude that you kind of understood it, but you didn't, but you trusted it. So that's very intuitive, where you're trusting more of the body wisdom rather than mental acuity, mental cognition. And mental cognition has a way of cooperating with body wisdom, so that when your mind starts to understand, your body will trust it more, you know? So that's why I mentioned the word context. It's like when your body starts to envelope context intuitively on a physical level, the mind starts to envelop this physical context with a mental context, where it's like, I get it, I understand. Well, the more the mind starts to understand, the body starts to understand more, because you can trust it more, because you get it. And then the more you get it, the more you're going to get it, and the more you don't get it, because you get it. It's going to pop up more questions, infinite questions, but you're going to get a lot of answers. We call that the illumination, the space in between the awakening and the unitive state, where there's still so much to work on, but we've done so much and we've already evolved. But because we're infinite, trust is a tool that's always going to have to be there. But there is a science behind trust, I think, and a lot of it is related to sound. I call it more or less like the sonar. A lot of it has to do with languaging or linguistics. When people know how to speak in a way that their body is listening, they're able to elicit answers and wisdom from the people that they're talking to, where there's a feedback loop that's more or less like channeling. In other words, you've seen me conduct some workshops or do some one-on-ones. For me, the real healing happens not when I'm facilitating people, but when people are facilitating themselves through me. So when I enter in a room where I'm empty, people are able to use me as a conduit, where they're able to speak to themselves using me as a channel. Because why would I be the one to talk to them? What would I care? I wouldn't know them. So I think that people need to understand certain basic tenets on universal languaging, like spiritual linguistics, and how it is that we're able to use our voice, because it's always there. Misunderstanding mostly being the biggest cause of human suffering, and it's our misuse of words that don't really have energy in it that is causing wars and causing most of the problems in human expression and human experience. Does that make sense?
It does. You mean like you refer to a misunderstanding of words, for example, or that our intentions are not in alignment with what we say?
Yeah, it's also that, the languaging is a tool, but yes, like like Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message. But one of the things that he said in communications theory is the user is actually the message, so that when you're talking to someone, it's not actually what you're saying that's important. Your actual message is you, like you are your message. So what we're seeing here in universal languaging is that the one who is speaking, the channel by which they're sending the sound, the message that they're saying and the person receiving it are actually one and the same thing. That we're one living organism talking to each other to establish the wisdom of the ages. And we become one. Like right now, it's like who's talking? Like, is it Javi? Is it Pi? Where are they getting the words?
That's a great question. What is, yes.
Yeah. Who is speaking? So it's the shared space. It's that space in between the vesica piscis, when two circles merge, and then there's that thing in the middle that looks like the human eye, or the leaf, which is also the Mayan glyph for zero. It's like the space of non-resistance and non-judgment and non-duality and non-attachment. It's that I can't think of a better way to describe God. Like it's not Javi, it's not Pi, it's both of them, which means it's everyone as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm excited about this. It's so good.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. It's insanity. It's the best insanity. It's like, why is it so complicated? It's also simple, isn't it? Yeah.
The question that comes to me, that I can perceive is, there are so many that are looking for healing and they are looking for awakening. So the question is, what's the easiest way to go through both?
It's the easiest is the hardest, and the hardest is going to be the easiest, isn't it? Because when you look at what you're doing now, you've been in 5 days in coconuts?
More or
6
less,
days,
yes.
4 days. Yeah. So when you think about it, it's like you're working hard at it. And for a lot of people who are in the normal way of living, that sounds like that's going to be hard. That's like the worst idea. I can't. It doesn't sound easy normally, but when you're in it, it sounds like this is the easiest thing because I'm not doing anything. It's a space of non-doing, which is closer to a space of being. So you see what I'm getting at? It's like we're just supposed to let go of that which we think we require to make us happy and to bring us into a state of joy, which is always 10 steps ahead of us and never arrives. And you look at what you're doing, you just merely stopped. So that's pure parasympathetic, because the parasympathetic system is when you go into the rest and digest, and you start to relax your muscles. Your blood and your enzymes, basically, instead of working on your muscles to keep yourself tense, and everyone's always tense, when they're in their head. All of that life force goes to your digestive system, and it begins to redirect information, old information, childhood information, cosmic information. It begins to digest and assimilate it. So I think that's the easiest thing. You just stop what you're doing and just be.
Wow.
But yeah.
What an answer.
But it's also it's the hardest as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I think this is where it lies. The work there is around going into the invisible network of the world where the true work happens. We call it the blueprint or the spiritual map of the world. And because us as people, we live in a visible world where everything that is in reality is that which we see with our eyes and that we can interact with in a very real way. When you look at what you're doing, you're basically managing the world through what you call the invisible, the world of magic, the world of primary orality, the world of the indigenous shamanistic truth that is non-linear, the right brain state. So I think what's happening is low context cultures are coming into low context culture where we're learning to trust and dialogue these energies. And how do I put that into words? Basically, we're beginning to manage the world's resources through our internal resources, where there's an abundance, where there's no entropy, where everything is infinite and we don't need to compete or to consume. I call it perception management.
Mm.
Yeah, rather than resource management or logistical management, which is based on Maya, the world of illusion, where you're always going to run out of resources and
Scarcity.
Yeah, scarcity. We're always driven by the fear-based motivation, most of which is scarcity or a sense of lack, a sense of insufficiency, which is still driven by that terror management theory that Beckett was talking about. So I love you. I love you for doing what you're doing. It's like,
But is it possible that when we change our perception, as you call it, perception management, we alter our external world as a consequence?
Yeah.
And how does that happen?
Okay, so I think this is where a lot of wisdom is coming into play, but a lot of confusion as well.
Yes.
So you watch these movies like The Secret, you look at these law of manifestation things,
Exactly.
Abraham Hicks, and a lot of people get excited because I can have $1 million next month. I can have my mansion. I can just become whoever I want to be. It's because of that thing that's hiding deep within us, that's still fear and illusion and judgment and tension, that is actually still driving a lot of the spiritual work. So I don't know if you know the work of Rupert Sheldrake. He talks about the morphogenetic field, basically that your true intelligence is never yours. It's never the individual's. It's never your mind. When people go deep enough into the spiritual work, they start to come into an emptiness where they realize, I am actually the room. So there's a vast difference between intuition and intention. And intention has a little bit of danger around it because intention is still coming from that, 3 to 10% of the brain that's normally working. What happens to the 90 to 97%? So when you become more sensitive or sensitized to the energy field that is so much bigger than your energy bubble that you think wraps around your body, what happens is you start to let go of control, and the thing that takes over is the room that is really called the universe. So the universe starts to think for you because that's really who you are. So you get out of the way. It doesn't mean you stop thinking. There's a difference between observation and thinking. But so I believe that the manifestation really works. But the thing is, we have to start cooperating with the actual nature of mind, which knows it so much more than anything our brains and our minds could ever hold, no matter how much ayahuasca and magic mushrooms and low-latent inhibition drivers and the human conditioning is really, really deep. This is what you call the injunctions and drivers, these subliminal messages that were planted into us when we were young. So the opposite of an injunction is a permission, or the opposite of a driver is an allower. So, for example, don't think, don't be happy. You don't deserve anything. These are injunctions. These are drivers, and a lot of people are living very seemingly successful lives because they are coping with these identifications, these very old pain that was planted to them at a very young age when they still couldn't defend themselves from this shame or guilt that was being exposed to their energetic bodies. So vulnerability, authenticity, or the energy of honesty, I think, really starting with the simple fact that we don't really know anything, which then makes enough space for us to realize that everything is known. And then we make space for that. And then number two, that yes, we are afraid because it's called magnetism. Even a rock has the energy of fear in it. Fear is that which binds all form together. The energy of the masculine is that which binds flow, the energy of the feminine, ever since the Big Bang. And all the other universes that ever existed have these dualities. How do we come into an honesty that, yes, I am afraid? Well, what paradoxically happens there is we're not scared anymore because we're honest. When we're authentic about it, it's like, I can speak to my fear and you don't have power over me anymore because I am now in observation of you. I feel that that's where the real work happens.
Oh. I'm loving it, Pai. What does humanity need at these times?
What does humanity need? I personally have been focused on two places in the world. If I could focus my energies, because you know me, I'm doing a lot.
Yes, you are. Impressively.
I'm working, on the eco-village movement, everything from sacred economics to. I feel that one of the first things we need to focus on is the schools. And when I say the school, I'm not just talking about the educational institution as much as I'm talking about the learning process itself. But that means we need to go in there. We need to get in there into those institutions to really come into grips on what does it all exactly mean. Everything is about information, isn't it? The more we go into this worldwide web of spirituality, called the semantic network, this network of meaning spread across the whole universe that's mirrored in the neural network inside the body, because we're so overwhelmed with what's called the world. It's basically filtered through latent inhibition, where our amygdala, our emotional button, is overly triggered into fear states and fight or flight. We're not able to harness the energy of the world, which is information. So we're absorbing so much every single day. I think at every given moment, we're absorbing as many 40 billion bits of information when we're actually only able to hold on to 40 bits at a time. That's overwhelming, isn't it? So I think were our minds to start to function in a more objective and contextual format, we would be able to assimilate this eternal conversation, this feedback loop that's always happening between everyone that we're interacting as mirrors of our true selves. The schooling system would be one of the most important areas that we would need to focus on. And the other one would be the hospitals. You look at them, they're more in polarity. Like the schools is where the information is only beginning to be absorbed and assimilated. And when you look at the hospital, it's quite the opposite. It's like, I'm sick of this information. This information is not cancer. This information is now a heart attack or a brain tumor. I need to let go. I need to get rid of it. So you can see why we need to talk to doctors then. It's like quite the opposite. So what I've been doing lately is I've been getting doctors and teachers together. Isn't that incredible? Like in the first year of my spiritual work, I remember just recently that my insight was, if I was going to die in this world, one of the last things I wish to see before I expire is I want to see doctors learning how to teach, because the new medicine is consciousness. But I want to see teachers learning to heal.
Wow.
Oh my God. So I've been bringing them together. I've been establishing some school models. Like I'm working with a school in India. I'm working with teachers in the Philippines and different parts of Asia. I've also been working with healers and doctors here in this country. And I think the convergence, this surrendering into each other, the metacognitive or the ontological state is the a priori level. It's the overlord, like the being behind the being, the being with a capital B. So that when you say Havi, you're looking at the larger component being the human beings or the divine feminine or whatever category you exist under. Let's say you're a horse, you have like the perfect a priori ontological horse. So I think that it's not really these human doctors and human teachers talking to each other. I feel that the ontological medicine and the ontological education, learning and healing unto itself, is coming together, and they're learning to see the symmetry between them. And then it's just a matter of time before we bring in like sacred economics. Where does permaculture set in? Where does the eco-village framework set in? Where does systems of spiritual governance set in? So we understand this as the chakra systems, or the different dimensionalities of the human experience, which you might see when you look at the seed of life, which are those 7 circles coming together, or is it 19 circles in the flower of life? All of this sacred geometry actually talks about a blueprint that we don't have to figure out because it's already figured out. You know, we don't need to connect the dots are connected. So if we are open, it's going to come to us. It's a holographic nature of wholeness that will show up as whole systems healing, whole systems thinking, whole systems communication, whole systems learning. All of those are the institutions that we think are real, that looks like City Hall, or looks like a hospital, looks like a university, but are actually dimensions that are part of a very deep and larger blueprint we call the soul.
Wow. There's a question that comes to me that I'm like even considering to ask or not. I think it's kind of big, but I'm just going to throw it out there.
Go.
Let's see what happens.
Where? Okay, I think we're ready.
So what is the difference between the holographic perception, I think you called it, or our natural state? Is there a difference at all?
What do you mean by natural state? Just so I know.
Or our, when we can call it, like when we awaken to who we are, or our holographic external reality.
Okay. So there's this irony, right? That we're awakening into the wise old woman and the wise old man. That is the metaphor for the, you know, like we're going to become Gandalf and Galadriel, the ascended masters. But isn't it ironic that the more you become like that, the more you become like the baby? So I feel that half the world seem to be born with a tendency to go into spirituality. A lot of these people are what you might call the highly sensitive, highly reactive beings, which shows up as shyness. You know, when people are shy, even culturally, there are cultures that are more shy than others. It's also definitive that these people are going to become like introverts, like artists or healers or people who go into service, as opposed to people who are more adjusted to the world. These are shy beings, are the ones whose amygdala are very easily triggered, so that they're highly sensitive to the world. They cry more, or they're more emotionally unstable. Well, that's spirituality. These are people who are basically more sensitive to the holographic nature of the universe. And sometimes you would call these people autistic, bipolar, schizophrenic, multiple personality disorder. So the real term that we can use to encompass all of it is basically called low-latent inhibition. And a lot of it is determined by the mesolimbic or rewards pathways. It depends on the dopamine cycle. The more you seem to accentuate this neurotransmitter in terms of attention, memory, motor functions, or emotions, we become very control-oriented. We become addicted to this internal happiness drug that people have to get wired around when they're in their normal way of living. So there seem to be people who are born with a lot more dopamine going into the striatum, or the place in the brain that's activated through spontaneity or novelty, a sense of newness, this baby-like perception of the world where everything is like a white page or the blank slate. So for me, that's the holographic nature of the universe. And when you look at an autistic kid, for example, they can't shut that off. You know, they're sensing the 97% as opposed to the 3% that's very guarded and filtered in most human beings. So I basically don't see a difference. But I think that going back into high and low context cultures, when people go into spirituality, there is either the pathway to escape. In the beginning, a lot of the work is going to be to escape the old patterns and to escape the subjectivity, to escape the pain. And that's very necessary indeed. But the more you do that, the more you go into insightful and visionary states of perception where it feels like everything is starting to speak to you, where coincidences and synchronicities, serendipity is happening. So for me, holographic might be experienced as bliss, where that's a very physical experience, where the universe is embodied in what you call the physical. But for some people, they seem to be more wired to experience the holographic through the upper regions, the higher chakras, where they see it more as altered states, heightened, expanded states of awareness. That is very confrontational, very observant. Like they'd be speaking to you and they seem to be sensing something, a kind of message that seems to be very important in the present moment. Not something to get hung up about, not something to be struggling with, but a very deep sense of meaning that is relaxed and is ready to take responsibility and to take ownership, whether this experience is taking place as something scary or something joyful. So somewhere in between that would be the level of awareness of non-duality, where it doesn't matter if it seems spiritual or non-spiritual. It doesn't matter if it seems like we're being supported by externality or not. Something starts to slow down, a kind of stillness where, like I am. No matter what happens, I am. And I just see. Everything is white. It makes sense. It doesn't make sense. So, if I meet anyone who would say I've charted this, I would walk away from it, primarily because we are choosing a way of coming into this world where we can't really grasp this fully, which is the enjoyment of it. That's the point. Like, let's enjoy it. There is no death. We're never going to die. We may as well enjoy it. We're going to be here for a very long time. Let's enjoy it.
Oh my god, it's so much fun to listen to you. Actually, the depth are like, wow. And as you were saying, it's just 1%. I'm so sure of it.
Well, what is so fascinating, even with me watching me, is a lot of the things I'm saying came to me myself personally as the energy of death. There are two sides of the same coin. So a lot of the things that I'm sharing is actually murder, death, kill to the ego or separation, where normally when these visions come to us, it's coming at the point of releasing shame or releasing the pain body. And I guess it's telling us that we are able to hold on to the wisdom in a way that, kill me, murder me. It's okay. We're one. And, but I can imagine that a lot of people might be listening to what I'm saying. It's like, what is he saying? I really don't get it. Like, I don't want that to be true, because that means that it's very inconvenient to be living in a way that you can't hold on to anything, Let's hold on to everything.
Yeah, but we'll find guidance, resonance, the ones that already are or looking for it.
Yeah. It's certainly accelerating, and it's showing up. I feel that 2016 is a very special year. Would you agree?
How so?
I don't know. Like, you look at my name, Pi, right? Pi is the Greek. It's a Greek letter. It's the 16th Greek letter of the alphabet, which is 1 + 6, which is number 7. So 2016. I'm getting a lot of visions around dragon energies, which is the combination of the lowest and highest chakras, the serpent and the eagle, the serpent coming into flight. I don't know. It just feels like time has slowed down enough that we could speak to the infinite elements that are available. So I'm gaining a lot of solitude, that no matter how busy I am, like I'm so incredibly busy, but it's pretty fascinating how much time I now have to draw out a lot of the ancient sunlight that we all are holding inside the... I'm living in Manila now, like one of the most populated cities in the world.
The irony.
And I'm enjoying it. I feel like I'm able to open this book through this density, and I'm not really tempted to go outside there and intermingle with a lot of the pressure and the anxiety. But really just being here in this busy place, Manila, general Metro Manila area has like 20 plus million people. I feel like, the black hole, the part in the universe where there's infinite magnetism, that last part in the movie Interstellar, where he could take forever behind the library where he was reading the book of the Akashic Records, the book of life, the tree of good and evil, of knowledge. I think that when we come into spirituality and when we land back in the world, there's something about the gamma state that is now moving and vibrating inside of us, that when we go into the world in a state of delta, everything starts to slow down. And I feel that if we are able to experience time in this way, where time doesn't own us, but we own time, there's something about it that becomes enjoyable. Like everything becomes new, and we're not able to hold on to anything specific. I was reading these words today by Yeats. He was saying something like, obsolescence is the doorway to superabundance, or something like that, meaning it's like I'm writing something one day and the next day it doesn't make sense to me anymore. It's like it evolved into something new that I can barely recognize, and it poses another question to the answer. Yes, it's so like, what does that mean?
Yes, quantum jumps all the time.
Yeah, but because we all have these experiences in school where we were being bombarded with all of this information, understanding how the brain works, I'm starting to see that the ultimate learning actually happens when the body is moving, because that's how the neurons are able to connect with the synapses and are able to store information on a cellular level. So can you imagine we're in school and we're sitting behind a desk, and then there's this teacher trying to imagine that you're a blank canvas and they're there to fill you up with information. But you already knew. We were so intuitive, and we forgot to dance. And so now there's something about the more spiritual we become, the more curious we are. It's like we're starting to have this communion with the world, this sexual consumptive encounter with the world, that it's not really in a destructive way anymore. It's like the thing that gives birth after that sexual encounter is the actual baby is inside. It's like we start to feed on self-understanding, that I'm not really my history anymore. We are the history of all that was. And the desire is to understand why we did this. Why did we create all of this? And where is it going? How do we reconstruct all of this mess to the paradise that we know is the ultimate purpose for having done it in the first place? So thus having the creativity and the courage, the wisdom and determination to rearrange all of these building blocks we call money or land, or what do I do today, or whatever, air. How do we deconstruct and then reconstruct everything that it starts to hold in a way that doesn't really break anymore, but is something that we can enjoy, that even no matter how it seems to shift left and right, we're not judging it, that this is what's coming to us, and I love it. I love it. I want to talk to it. I want to engage with it. Yeah.
Oh, Pai, I think we're more or less on a time frame, speaking about time.
Okay.
I want to ask you one last question, though, which is,
Sure.
What's your vision?
Right.
Do you want to share that with us?
Sure. What is my vision? Okay, I love this question. My vision is to help others find their vision. I feel that everyone has a unique imprint in them. And because I've been watching so many people go into states of transformation, for me, it doesn't matter if you keep crying in a healing session and you experience joy. It doesn't matter if a cancer goes away. It doesn't matter if you have multiple scoliosis and then that comes back to normal. What matters to me is an alignment of internally held information that you can almost hear it, a fulcrum turning in a place in the middle, or like a bing, like, yeah. That for me is the vision. And for me, I know that my pure enjoyment comes when I watch other people find their own. I guess it's because I have been at this work for so long, and I'm not just talking about this lifetime, where there are so many things that I can take for granted. But there's something underneath that, though, that is coming into being. I used to be in the marketing field, like advertising, and a lot of my training had a lot to do with communications and languages and ways of conveying information. And I know enough that I've had past lifetimes and even in this life where I'm not always easy to understand because I'm driven by an internal mechanism that I am often not always understanding as well. I might seem delusional, or I might seem insane or crazy or irresponsible. But there's something consistent in me that seems to have the ability to hold on to some internal mechanism that doesn't stop working. No matter how much I go down or go up, something doesn't really bend. It's irreducible and it's unbendable. And a lot of that has to do with communication. It feels like having these past lives of not always being understood, I have been trying to convey a certain message that we all have within us. So then it's not something I'm sending, but something that I am wanting to remind in myself. And the more I'm seeing that coming into recognition in other people, there's a joy. Something happens in me that looks like a healing and a transformation at the same time. So I will be spending most of my remaining years on Earth mapping out essential language. I don't know if you have heard of this guy named Noam Chomsky. He's the most famous linguist in human history. And one of the things he discovered is called universal grammar. That when we were born in this world, we actually knew how to communicate. There's this theory called the poverty of input, where when you measure it, there's not enough time and opportunity for a baby coming into childhood and teenage years to have learned human language as perfectly as they start to exhibit it, even at an early age. That language is inbuilt. Language is innately networked inside of us. So I'm seeing this from a higher degree of awareness, where languaging isn't so much just the way we are speaking to each other in a verbal way. So I'm not even talking about secondary language, which is writing, which isn't even language. Like when you look at the work of Walter Ong and Marshall McLuhan, and the research out there, it's like 3,000 languages out there, only 78 have written languages there. So there's something destructive about the way we had to go into literacy, which is so much more left-brained and so much more linear. The way we stored information in the libraries, how can you read all of that? So with the advent of new media, this internal spiritual Google, this internal YouTube, TED Talk, podcast thing that's happening all around the world, what I feel is happening is we're evolving into another way of accessing our internal and external experience of the information that is us. And I think we need to track this because the changes are happening so fast. And we like to think negatively about it, that there's no content. When you look at social media, there's no content. When you look at cable television, but we have to trust it because it's not just the languaging that's innate. It's also the content. We have to understand that there's an aspect of the universe that is self-organizing, that is wise, and that has the internal guidance mechanism that it's not really the human beings that are planning things out. And when human beings get out of the way by way of mindset, we become the divine creatures that starts to get into teamwork with the designer, the grand script writer that is, it isn't figuring it all out because time is an illusion. That's what they've said, even since the time of the Greek philosophers, pre-Socratic eras. So I think with the advent of this new media, this technology comes spiritual technology that goes hand in hand. We need to catch up with the spiritual technology that guides these companies, these corporations, along with the educational institutions and the medical systems, the governance, economics, to kind of match externally what is already networked from the semantic, neural, echoic, and auric network that is perfect. This holographic nature of universality, of singularity. How do we then work together? So languaging then not just as a tool, but as an ontological discipline, like going into ways of speaking to each other that we're not just interested in the surface meaning, but going into the deeper underlying meaning of what is being, who are we, and what does it all mean? Because that's what we lost, isn't it? We're just talking and talking and
That's the
doing
biggest question, yes.
Really, yeah. So how do we then have the normal conversations, but also takes into consideration the philosophical inquiry, you know? And that's what you're doing heavy, like through these podcasts. I'm so amazed at the work that's being done, especially through sound. So this is what they call secondary orality, that we used to be into oral tradition where we were able to live in the world of magic, and then literacy came, and then we had to let go of that. We became more linear and left-brained. But with the advent of this new accelerated evolution and progress into the global village that's all interconnected, what's actually happening is this thing called secondary orality, where, okay, this caps it, right?
I'm loving every word.
This caps it. This is reshaping the central nervous system, right? Get this. The shift from primary orality into literacy was the journey from the heart to the mind, or what you call the ear to the eye. Okay? We used to use sound a lot more when we conveyed information, but when we became more literal and literate, we became more visual. And when you become more visual, you're more judgmental, you're more contracted, you're more, like the world is more real. It's more like knowledge rather than wisdom-based. You become more stuck in the prefrontal cortex. We forgot to use the limbic system. We forgot to use the spiritual parts of the body, which is in the brainstem, and all of our neurons, our synapses weren't connected. So with the advent of new media, it's not the causality. It's actually just a manifestation or mirror of the spiritual awakening that's happening as well, having passed through the Enlightenment stages, the modernism, postmodernism, coming into this digi-modernism. Basically, that acceleration is going to happen so much faster and faster. So can you see what's happening? Like we shifted from the ear to the eye. And now we're going back to the ear, without losing our context that the eye has given us, which was the part of us that was able to hold on to progress. What you would have to look at the whole thing to make sense of this, how even oil and fossil fuels was able to hold complexity through economic systems. We also were able to do it through knowledge systems, you know? So I would love for spiritual beings out there who are walking around, undergoing healing work, to start encompassing this global history that is not just this epoch, but the vastness of the universe is speaking to us. How do we engage each other without separation? How do we embrace each other in a way that it's all meaningful? You know? So, yeah, exciting.
Wow. Those words, just to finalize this amazing talk and time with you, are just so uplifting.
Well, it's because you know me. This actually frames inner dance in the most science-based way, doesn't it? Because it's kind of hard to understand inner dance sometimes because it looks cathartic and it looks like spiritual process. But when you understand the science behind it, it helps us to land the pragmatic and practical aspects of it that wants to really enter into the world as just another way of understanding, which is a state of consciousness. Yeah. Yes. So thank you. Thank you so much. I feel so good having spoken to you. I needed it. I needed to talk to someone today. I was getting all of these insights. Where is it going to go? Oh, Javi. Let's talk to Javi.
And that this way we are talking to so many.
Yeah. It's not Javi.
It's such a productive way.
Yes, receiving that. And sending all your listeners, thanking them for the support that goes into keeping this going, because it is going. And I'm hoping that this conversation contributes to this large conversation that's, changing so many lives.
Thank you to everyone.